This is Ramon, the channel is Alpha 4. This is a book review. Please like, please subscribe. Please hit that little bell because that's the only way you're going to get notified of any new content. Let's get started. First off, I'd like to say that the book itself, if you haven't read it, is a good book. It's not the greatest book in the world, though. There are some, let's say, drawbacks to the book. For one thing, the most interesting characters in here are Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, and at some points, Mr. Bennet, the father. All the rest of the characters outside of Miss Bennet all sound the same, all of them. So I don't know if that was something that Jane Austen was trying to do in the book, where only the characters who think sound unique, or if it was simply she did not put as much work into those other characters. That being said, the book by itself is worth reading. It's very entertaining to hear them talk. Also, when it comes to the father, when you're a child and you read this book, or you've only seen the movies, you might think of the father as insensitive or kind of foolish, maybe even slightly abusive, or maybe even cruel to the mother. In the actual book, you don't get that sense. He's actually a very loving father who's in kind of a crappy situation, but he has a lot of wit and he has a lot of sarcasm, and that comes in and influences Elizabeth's personality. Mr. Darcy, who in most movies is presented as a purely good guy who Elizabeth simply misunderstands, that's not the case here. He's very prideful, he's very prejudiced himself. It's not Elizabeth being prideful and prejudiced, it's both characters. The sisters here, just like in the movies, kind of remind me of the sisters in Little Women. Each one is a different cliche and a different generic female. The only non-generic female in here is going to be Elizabeth. Now, that might be ironic. The mother might be flighty and overbearing and worrisome. One of the sisters might be a little promiscuous, and the other sisters may be a little attention hungry. But outside of that, you don't really get any character development. Even the character development that's done, the greatest character development in here, which is Mr. Darcy, his development isn't really development, because he's only developing to get Elizabeth to like him. You know the rest. You know Wickham, you know Bingley, you know all these characters. So that's not really the point. The point is not really the characters here. This is more of a satire. This book is full of irony, and I think that irony is poignant. I think it's there to make fun of society. I know that a lot of people think of this book as a romance, but I think it's a comedy. And I think it's satirizing society both as it was in Jane Austen's time and society as has been presented both before and after her lifetime. The way that men and women interact with each other, the rules that are set down for interaction. Today with the SJWs, she would have a field day making fun of them. At the same time, she would have a field day making fun of their parents for the way that they interacted. She would, back in the 1920s or the 1940s, she would have a field day with the American social structure. It doesn't matter what time period you put this in. The satire and the irony works. What doesn't work is the language. The language is very dated. If read through the modern lens with just language and with no context to history, this book becomes a very different book. If you don't understand the history of the book, if you don't understand what period it's from, the characters are all very promiscuous, the morals in here are utterly lacking, and the comedy is more abrupt and upfront. If, on the other hand, you take the language as it was meant in the time period it's from, the comedy is very droll, very ironic, and you have to pay attention to get it. Also, there's a whole character in here that doesn't get played up as much in the movies. Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who is extremely important to the whole story. the ending that you want to get can't happen without her involvement. So I'm recording this afterwards, so the audio and the sync aren't going to exactly match up. But I give the book a 3 out of 5. Wasn't the greatest Jane Austen I've ever read, but it wasn't terrible. I liked it. I thought it was a really good book. When it comes to the movies, I think the Keira Knightley movie is good, but I'd actually recommend a BBC miniseries, which you'll hear me talk about in about a second. So anyway, enjoy the rest of this review, and I'll talk to you all later. Most of the movies that you're going to see are actually more like summaries of the book. They're not really full explorations. I'd recommend watching either a BBC miniseries of just this book or simply reading the book, because most plays, most movies, most TV shows based off this book just is not going to have everything in here that makes this book worth reading and makes this book interesting. Anyway, please like and subscribe, comment down below. Talk to you all later.